In 2014, my wife and I carried out a major home extension project on our house, our grand design as we like to think of it. We did a two-storied extension and we also did a loft conversion, and while we were doing that we took the opportunity to do all the little things around our property which we felt were worth doing. The idea being it's far more economic to do all these things in one go while you've got contractors on site rather than to do lots of separate projects over a long period. So the first thing we thought about was what we actually had. We bought our house in 1990. It was brand new, a very nice house, reasonably spacious, 4 bedrooms. We live in a close. Our house has got a small amount of land around it, and unusually it's got a very, very large attic which we'd use to store lots of stuff in. So the thing was, how could we do an extension project where we would maximize what we got out of it, where we would minimize what we spent doing it, and where we would also increase the value of our property? It's very easy to do an extension project where in actual fact you don't increase the value of your property very much at all. So we spent quite a few years really thinking our way through it. The conclusion we came to was, right, let's do a two-storied extension with a loft conversion over the top. While we're at it, we'll replace all the carpets because they're 24 years old. We'll replace all the windows because they're 24 years old. The burglar alarm needs updating and we'd like to have a fire alarm installed as well. We also want solar panels on the roof. The central heating is an oil burner with its own oil tank, obviously. Our oil burner and oil tank was 24 years old, so they were certainly up for replacement, and we were quite keen to get an air source heat pump because we feel that that's obviously the way things are moving. So over time we just thought about things really, talked with friends, looked at other friends' building projects, and started getting our ideas together. Once we really were getting to a stage where we would like to start really moving ahead on it, the two things coming up was planning permission and mortgage. We had some money in the bank, but the money in the bank wasn't really earning much interest. Mortgage rates were very, very low, and my feeling was that money in an extension would give me more space, but also it would increase the value of my property and hopefully be a good investment. So that was my thoughts on that. The planning permission, obviously, we'd heard lots of stories about how difficult it was to get planning permission, and so possibly would be a non-starter anyway. But nevertheless, I was quite interested just really to see how the whole process would work. So by this point in time, we needed to decide, should we get an architect to help, or a project manager of some sort, or should we go it alone? I wasn't intending to go it alone. My feeling was that we would definitely get expert help, but I realized that it's very easy while you're formulating your ideas to take experts and then end up paying them lots of time where you're not really getting anything. It's more a case of they're waiting for you to decide what you want. And so I searched around on the internet and I got a little software package called Architecture 3D. Only cost me £35, and it was about how to architect your own house basically. I spent a few evenings working out how the software package worked, and I had to actually measure up my own property, the size of the rooms, the size of the windows, and in effect recreate my property within the software package. Then it was a case of figuring out how much space I had around my house, and we had a strip of land just on the northern side, and in this strip of land was a bit of grass. The chimney projected out into it, and then there was the hedge. But I worked out by going up to 1 metre to the boundary, which is what we're allowed to do, we could actually get 3.7 metres, which is actually quite a nice amount of space for an extension. So that was pretty good. So I then spent time with this little software package designing my grand design, or our grand design. So I built up the two-storied extension and then the loft conversion. And then I checked with my wife as to whether she felt that was the right thing to do. And she had a few queries. One query she had was, well, the dining room didn't really look big enough for the dining table and the furniture. Now this is where it's quite interesting, because these modern programs you can actually also put in the furniture. So I was able to actually create in the program some furniture, measure it up to be the same size as ours, and then I was able to sit my wife down in front and say, right, this is what it would look like. And during the 3D, using the 3D mode on the video, we were able to sort of open the dining room door, and there was the dining table and the furniture, and we could see that it was about the right sort of size. So that was all looking good. So mortgage, we applied for a mortgage. It didn't cost anything to apply. I wasn't sure whether we would get it, but they just came straight back and said, yeah, that's fine. So that was good. So the next thing was planning permission. Now, planning permission, I know from chatting to other people that the biggest thing that stops you with planning permission is neighbours who complain. So we were very careful to go around and speak to our neighbours first. The neighbours who were opposite us were the people who were most affected by it, and they said that they wouldn't raise any objections, so that was fine, that was great. We also had neighbours that were well over a back fence over the back garden, who we assumed wouldn't be bothered, but nevertheless we went round to see them, and they said it would be fine. We made the application, and the application again, I did most of that myself. I couldn't quite figure out how to do all of it on the council, on the local council website, but another friend of mine helped me out, so we got that fine. And then nothing for a while. We just sat around, life continued. After about a month, we got someone from the council contacted me, said he'd like to come and have a look. That was fine. He came, he looked, and I explained what I wanted. And he actually said, well, we don't have any objections, and none of your neighbours have objected, so that looks pretty positive. We can't confirm that you got planning permission, but let's wait and see. As it turned out, in the last couple of days, one of the neighbours then did complain, even though they said they wouldn't. We was quite surprised. They felt that it would take away some of their light. As we were on the northwest side of their property, this seemed pretty unlikely because the sun obviously goes to the south. But hey, these things happen. We kept our fingers crossed, and the council did actually grant our application, and it came through. So as it turned out, we actually managed to get our planning permission without actually involving an architect or a project manager. I wouldn't necessarily recommend doing things this way, because I think taking on expertise from an architect or a surveyor or someone who specialises in this is generally well worth your while. Once we had got the planning permission, at that stage we did involve an architect for two reasons. One was that I wanted someone really just to review what ideas we had and to see if there were any other things that we should consider. The other thing was that we needed actually diagrams, drawings drawn up for the the building regulations approval. Both those things were new. So in summary there, we managed to get to the stage of actually doing having the planning permission, and by then we'd only spent £500. I would recommend, if you're hiring an architect, to still try and do as much as you can yourself before hiring the architect, because otherwise you can waste a lot of the architect's time while you are trying to get your ideas together. Now, if you're trying to get your ideas together and the architect's coming and going and producing diagrams and then reproducing diagrams and adjusting them, you've got to remember that you're paying for that. So the more you can get your ideas together beforehand, the more you'll save money. The one other thing we did have with doing our loft conversion was the types of beams to use. Normally you'd have to put in steel beams. If you've only got a relatively narrow span, you can do it with a wooden beam, but if you've got a wide span, you need steel beams. A problem with steel beams is that you need a crane to actually put them in, and also they tend to be quite high. By talking to quite a few people, other ways came up, and one person said to me, you should consider using tele beams. And this is an aluminium beam that's telescopic and would actually meet my distance. I think they go up to something like 8.6 meters. My distance was 8 meters. And These saved us a phenomenal amount of money. As it turned out, that my builder Giles said later on that probably saved us somewhere between £5,000 and £10,000. And they weren't really high. If they'd been iron beams, they would have been something like I think 40 millimetres high in our case, whereas because they were the telly beams, I think they were 30 millimetres. Don't quote me on those numbers, but that's that sort of ballpark. I think the point we're making here is that once you've decided what you're doing and how you're going to do it, keep your eyes open to other possible ways, because there may be other ways out there that are actually much quicker, much cheaper. And the way you find that out is chatting to friends, reading things on the internet, and of course hiring expertise like an architect or something like that. Great, so all of a sudden we had planning permission for our grand design. We had the mortgage lined up for our grand design. The next step was to get a builder. I had been in discussions with a friend of mine, Giles, who was in the Rotary Club, so I knew him quite well, and we worked on various projects together, and I found him great to work with. But I wasn't going to place an order with one person without actually checking out what else was possible. So I then went on a few websites and wrote off to, or contacted various builders and to get some more quotes. The other interesting thing is, even if you don't go looking for a builder, once you've got a planning application approved, various builders see that and then contact you anyway. So I had 3 or 4 builders who actually contacted me out of the blue. So that was great. I had them round. They varied a lot. I felt comfortable pretty much with all of them, but I found it rather strange that about half of them didn't actually produce a quotation. Having said that they were interested in doing it, no quote, they obviously stayed off the list. Of the rest, I found one was incredibly highly priced, so either he'd just got the price completely wrong, or he was really a middleman where he was just going to get someone else to do it anyway. I don't know, but he was off the list. That got me down to about 4, and the other 4 were all pretty similar. The prices were similar, and it was just a case of picking the best one. My friend Giles, who I knew quite well, obviously, was who I in the end decided to go for. Timing wise, this was early spring, and Giles was working on a project that would be finished off in about a month's time. So the timing actually worked out really, really well. It meant that we could actually start building it only in about a month's time, and we'd be building in the summer. And the summer was quite important to us, because when you're doing an extension and you're still going to start playing around with the roof line, one question you have is, are you going to build a tin roof over the whole thing, or can you get away with just using a few tarpaulins? Some of the builders had said tin roof, some of the builders had said tarpaulins. We decided to go without the tin roof, and as it turned out, that worked out quite well. We didn't have any problems at all. The other thing that turned out, building in the summer probably saved us a lot of money, because we had very few rainy days, it wasn't cold, and the builders really did crack away later on. So we had that month wait for the building work to actually start. So thinking ahead, we decided, what else can we do? So we went around the house and identified everything in the house that we didn't actually need, and we put it into storage. We hired one of these high secure places for all the high value stuff. And then the bulk of the rest of the stuff, we had a friend with a barn, and one of my partners had some office space, so we were able to move things out. Lots of car journeys, but that was great. Also had a big clear out, sold some stuff on eBay, things like that. It's always useful having a spring clean. So the day came when the builders arrived, and that was when we really realised this really was happening. So it was decided, the first thing was to actually build the extension. So they turned up with a digger, they hired a digger, and they hired some skips and so forth, and they dug all the ground out at the end of the house for the foundations for the extension. This was a case of digging down 1.6 metres and checking what depth the existing foundations were. Now, we're on chalk, And if you're on chalk, you're very lucky because chalk is nice and straightforward. If you're on shrinkable clay, then you need much deeper foundations and is a much greater expense required. So in our case, it was chalk. We were down 1.6 metres, and then it was a case of one of these big concrete mixer trucks turning up and filling up the big hole with lots and lots of concrete, and then building up from there. One thing that you do need to make sure is that the building regulations officer actually visits during the right stages, because on our particular project, the building officer missed the main day when we were pouring the concrete on the foundations, and later on he required us to actually break down into part of the foundation so he could examine it and then build it up again, which I thought was a bit crazy, but that's the way it is. So when you're pouring concrete foundations, make sure the building regulations officer can see what he wants. And the other thing is take lots of photographs, so at least if you've got any queries afterwards, you can actually show photographs that might be enough to actually make him comfortable with what you've actually done. Building regulations officer, you might see him as someone who's a bit onerous, but he's there for you. He's there to make sure that your property is built correctly and your property is built in a way where it's not going to fall down. So it's well worth having a good relationship with your building regulations officer. He can help you. So they built up the foundations, and then they started laying the blocks, and they built up the brickwork. And over the space of a few weeks, the brickwork came up with the 2 stories. Then it was a case of building the superstructure for the loft to go over the actual 2-story extension, and then to join up with the existing house. So this is where they played around with a few tarpaulins and things like that. We were really lucky, we didn't get any rain, so they were able to join it up, tile it, and then that was great. So that was a 2-story extension. So at that stage it's just block work, but in the inside it's now dry, and that was useful because it was a place that we could store things in. So as we needed to, things were sort of pushed through there for storage. The next step was then to really start doing the actual loft conversion of the existing house, and so now this is when we got scaffolding built all the way around the house. It was a massive amount of scaffolding, but that was the way to do it. Then they removed some of the tiles from the lower edge. They took a strip of about 1 metre right the way along the edge, and you can see this in some of the photographs, and that gave them access to the inside. On the inside, you can see from the photographs that initially it was just pre-made trusses going in all directions. These had to be taken out, but this process has to be done the right way in the right sequence. So the first thing they had to do was to slip in the long telescopic aluminium beams, and they were screwed along the side. Then the rafters above had to be strengthened with extra rafters put in. And then it was a case of chopping out a lot of the pre-made trusses and replacing that just with bits at the side and bits at the top, and making it all solid. So we then ended up where we had this huge room at the top of our house. It was like a bowling alley, absolutely amazing to look at, because it had all been built as an open space. From there, we had a layout as to what we were going to do, but we actually changed when we had other ideas about a better way to do it. It was really neat being able to just move little bits of wood around on the floor, representing where the walls would go, and then decide the absolute optimum layout where we got the rooms just to be the right sizes. Once we had got the layout established, then the builders built the walls, and hence built the rooms upstairs. So that was all great. The other thing they put in obviously was Velux Windows. Velux Windows, you need to have them at a certain height so that people don't fall out by mistake. But they can't be too high because they've also got to be used if there's a fire where you can get out in a fire. So again, that's a little thing you've got to get right, otherwise the building regulations officer will come along and identify that it's wrong, and he would tell you you've got to get it corrected. And this is another thing. When you place your order with the builder, there's 2 ways to do it. A lot of people go for a fixed price. So they decide what they want, they go for a fixed price, and they hope that the builder will actually deliver what they want. The disadvantage with a fixed price is that the builder then really has every incentive to take every shortcut that he can get away with. And he might take some shortcuts that aren't really what you want. But if you haven't specified something well enough beforehand, you're going to have to start paying extra. Also, as you start going through your project, you find things that you want different anyway. If you go with a fixed price project, then of course the builder is always going to be charging you extra for these, and you may find that you're actually paying quite a lot extra for these things. The other way to do it is to actually do it where it's not on a fixed quote. It's basically on a time basis, and that was actually the option I went for. So my builder gave me a very, very detailed spreadsheet breakdown of all the costs, and he said, right, my estimate is that's what it's going to cost, assuming that we do build exactly what you've actually specified. And this way of doing things I found was absolutely excellent, because each week we would sit down, we would go through the spreadsheet, and I would pay all of the suppliers directly. So I wasn't paying through a builder where he's then putting a markup or taking a slice. This is a much more open way to do it, and it was a way where I was very much involved in the actual whole process myself, which was great. There was also some of the things I bought in myself that saved us money. I just felt more in control of the project. So that's one thing you will need to decide. Are you going to go for a fixed price, or are you going to go on an estimate? I went on an estimate, and I was very pleased with the results. So getting back to the actual building itself, so we had the two-story extension up, we had the loft all joined up and the big space in the loft, and we filled up the space by putting in the rooms, building the walls, and from here we needed to then start doing a lot of the other little jobs that we needed doing. The carpet, as I mentioned earlier on, was 24 years old, so that had pretty much all been ripped up and that was gone now. And obviously that wasn't finally replaced until the very end, so we had lots of bare floors for quite a while. The other thing we needed to do was we wanted to get solar cells on the roof. So the time to do that was while all the scaffolding was there. So we had solar cells put at both sides of the roof so we could get electricity in the morning, electricity in the afternoon. We also had the oil burner and the oil tank taken away and an air source heat pump installed outside. So that was all fairly straightforward. We also wanted some Velux windows in one of the other roof lines, so that was the time to do that. That wasn't straightforward. When you put Velux windows into an existing roof, you have to make sure that there's enough strength to take them, and that was quite involved getting that to work, but we got there in the end. So by now, we've got pretty much the whole thing's done. We also, at this stage, replaced all the windows. Some of our windows, 24 years old, had started to come apart, but some of them were quite reasonable. But we decided we want them all to look nice, so we have all the windows replaced. That was another team of people who turned up and did that. So now we're in a situation where the whole thing's done except for the decorating. Now, some builders will do the decorating for you, or you can do it yourself. We decided to do it ourselves because it saves a lot of money, but it's not quick to actually do. So the build project itself was 4 months. We then probably spent about the next 12 months doing the actual decorating. It was painting all the walls, repainting the stairwells. Repainting a stairwell is a lot of work. You've got to clean up what you've actually got to start off with. Then you've got 2 sets of undercoat, 2 sets of overcoat, and it's a lot of work. But again, if you do it yourself, you can save a lot. Afterwards, my builder said that by doing my own decorating probably saved me about £10,000. So I was quite pleased to have made that saving by using my own time. The next thing after that was the garden, because obviously the garden got completely trashed during the whole project. My wife wasn't too concerned about this because she'd always wanted to redesign the garden anyway, so great. We had a garden designer who came up with some ideas that was very, very useful, and then we set to and we rebuilt the garden, putting in a bit of paving here and a bit of paving there, moving a fish pond, and planting new trees, shrubs rather. and over time that grew, and we're very pleased with that. Another thing I wanted was a garden shed. Now, the garden shed we were actually able to build pretty much out of recycled materials. When the original loft had everything chopped out, we kept all that wood in the garage, and I was able to use that wood to actually build the garden shed. We had a bit of concrete left over, so I was able to use that up. I had to buy a little bit more. We built the superstructure. The other thing that we got left over from the project was roof tiles. There was some roof tiles, which was an overspend, but we'd kept all those. We also managed to get some tiles from some of our neighbours because, as it turned out, when our neighbours saw what we were doing with our house, they decided that they wanted that with their house. So in actual fact, the builders stayed in the close for some time afterwards, rebuilding our neighbours' houses as well. All those roof tiles we collected up. I don't like wasting things. And so the garden shed, we were actually able to do a garden shed with tiled roof and tiled walls. So we've got a garden shed which is incredibly well built and should definitely last a long, long time. That was that one. So 2014 was the house rebuild. 2015 was the actual decorating. 2016 was the rebuilding the garden. 2017 was restoring some of my old furniture that we actually put into the house, mainly my dining table actually. But it was great. And then after that, we were pretty much done and dusted. We had lots and lots of friends coming to visit us, and we showed them around the grand design, and we gave tours regularly. And then eventually we got to the stage where all our friends had seen it, and now we just live in our nice little home, and we're very pleased with the results. So I hope this video is useful to you, and the photographs that you've seen while I've been talking through this give you some idea of what we're doing. I can say, with your own project, talk to as many people as you can, do hire experts, really do try and get your ideas together, and be aware there's lots of different ways to do things, and it's worth thinking your way through it, because you can save a lot of money by thinking your way through it carefully. If you don't spend a lot of time thinking your way through it, you could actually spend a lot more money than what you need to. So yeah, read up on lots of stuff. Carry on having a look around this website. On the My Home Extension website, we've got a lot of articles. Some of them are mine on various aspects of the actual design, but we've got quite a few articles there that should be of interest to you. Thank you very much.